Guys, how's it going? I hope everything is fine. So today we're just going to talk about the very last part of our project, which talks about databases with Firebase. So we started this last time in class, and today I will just show you a couple different things we need to do in order to get this to fully work. So this is my Firebase database, if you recall. So we created the database in class. And then essentially now we're just going to create a collection in which all the data is just going to be located. So we called our database students list, I believe. And remember in Firebase, there are a couple types of databases. There is the real time, which is what we need, but there is also the cloud Firestore, which you would have to actually manually toggle between these two to choose the real time database. Also remember, you gotta go to the rules and change these to true because by default both are false. So again, I'll just go into the data. This is essentially the URL we're gonna be using to make HTTP requests. And for HTTP, if you recall, what we did was we actually went to the terminal. Oops, not problems. And then in terminal, we actually got Axios. So I remember for Axios, we did, let me just exit that. We did, so make sure you are in the right directory. So essentially just npm install Axios. And then I already have it, so I'm not gonna run it. You need Axios for HTTP requests, okay? So now obviously my server is down. So if I go to my app, essentially it's not there, so I have to actually do npm run serve. Once that has happened, my app is just going to be up and running. So I actually, because of the school closing, I created the app pretty much from the start just by myself. I'm not sure if I have exactly the same components we created in class, but essentially here is what I have primarily. I have the app.view, and then also I have a students.view. I believe in the class we created the students and student item. In here, because of time, etc., everything is just inside my students.view component. And then I also have the add students component. So actually, if I just refresh, here is add student. Currently, the data is just, there is nothing, so we can't see any student in here. But we're just going to be able to actually, create students object, push them into Firebase, and then, display those students inside of our page. So as you see now, it's just empty. So if you recall, in add student component, we have two input buttons. And then when you submit, we actually call add student object. And then for add student function, and then add student function essentially takes an event just to print the default so that form won't submit to a file. And we created the student object. Remember the UUID to create unique IDs for every student. This .name is essentially going to be this attribute which V models to essentially this input element. And then by default, graduated is false. And then we emit this back to, like up to app.view. So the event name is add student, and then we're going to pass a new student. In app.view, essentially when this event is encountered, it's just going to call a function called add student that we're going to define under methods. Okay, so let's go ahead and implement this add student, and then essentially we're just going to see what we're going to do next. So essentially we have add student. Remember from add student.view, we're passing a new student. So it takes a new student. And then essentially just to make sure everything is working, let's just do alert hello. So new student is defined but never used. So let's just say plus equals student. So yeah, hello, it's getting cold. So now what we're gonna do is essentially post the new student to our Firebase. And we already have Axios, so I already commented this already, but import Axios from Axios. And then we do axios.post. Remember, there is post, get, delete, which we're gonna do them all in this video. So to post, we need the URL to post to. This is actually the URL, so I'm just gonna copy that. And then it needs to be quoted because it's a string. And then we need to actually assign a collection in which all the data is gonna be located at. So our collection, let's call it my students. And remember, this is JSON, so it's just gonna be .json. And then comma, in here, we're just gonna pass the data. And I believe we did this in class, but I thought I'm just gonna repeat that in this video. And then this one actually returns a promise. So we need then console.log data. And then in case things fail, let's just catch the error. So error console.log error. So now going back here, refresh. Let's say student 1, submit. Let's see what we got, what we have here. There we go. So now we have student 1, the ID, which is actually coming from the UUID tool, which we got. And then by default, student is, false for graduated. Now we're gonna actually make this better because you recall, like when I clicked submit, there's really nothing happening. So essentially, in order to even make this better, let's actually kind of push the student 1 into our my students array in here, because remember, it's actually currently empty, because the idea is we will be able to fill this array from our Firebase. So, it's working. So actually, I really don't need the console.log. So data, and then you know what? I think I can just, add this directly in here. So I'm gonna say is this.myStudents, which is this array. I'm just gonna actually push the new student. So now, as you push the data, you should be able to see the change right away. So student 2, then submit. Here's actually student 2, and here is the ID. I think in my students.view, I put the ID in here. You don't have to, so I can actually delete it, and then I just see student 2. So now if I refresh the page, essentially nothing is there because I don't have a method to actually retrieve the data from Firebase. We only started with this method, which is for add student, but we're just going to create that in just a second. However, essentially my student 2 is already in the database. And similarly, if I go and add student 3, click submit, it's already in here, and it should already be under, Firebase as well. So that's good. Now, what we need to do, and remember when we created this last time in class, essentially the most important part we need to do is before the application loads, we need to be able to come, contact the database, and we should be able to actually retrieve all the data from here. To make sure this would work, remember the view hooks we talked about? So in order to get this to work, we need to actually do the first thing as the application loads, is that we need to call, the hookup, which is called created. So in created, as the application is created, I think we have something missing. So yeah, I think we need comma. So when the application is created, we need to actually, the first thing we need to do is, again, contact Firebase and then retrieve the data, display them on the page. So to do that, it's just going to be Axios. This time, rather than post, we need to get. So to get, we pretty much get this whole URL. And let's see, so this is the URL. And then let's do then it returns data. Let's look at the data. And I think we also looked at this briefly in class last time. And then if something is wrong, let's catch the error and log the error. So let's refresh, inspect. So if we look, this is actually the result of this console.log the data. So the data that's returned is actually an object. And if you look, essentially everything that we see over here is inside of the data object. I'm not really interested in status or status text or header. This is what I really care about, because you can see all the data that I want is stored in here. And inside the data, because you can see essentially data is an object which has key value. So this key is essentially kind of like a unique ID. And we're going to talk about how we can actually replace this ID, which comes from the UUID, with this ID, because it's a lot better to do it that way. And we're going to talk about why in just a second. So essentially, I'm not even interested in the whole data. I'm interested in data.data. So I'm just going to actually call data.data. Now let's look at the output, because it's going to make a lot more sense now. And that's actually a lot better this way. So now, essentially, what we need to do is the following. We need to pretty much take all these three different objects in here, and essentially they're gonna be, put inside of my students array. So to do that, let's look again closely into what we have. So we have some key, some value, and then essentially another key, another value, another key, another value. So essentially for this object, in order to iterate over this object, we're gonna create a for loop, and then this for loop, we're actually, for each key in that for loop, we're gonna display the value for that key. So to do that, let's actually, because we're gonna do multiple steps, so I'm just gonna have curly braces. So to make it easy, I will define a variable called new data, that's data.data, okay? And then I will log a new data dot, let's see. Let's just keep it for now. Let's do the for loop. So for let key in a new data. And then now I will do console.log the key. Dot catch. Yeah, I think we need this to close it. Let me save and go here. So there we go. These are the keys that actually, we were able to get. But now I'm not really interested in the keys. I'm interested in the values held in those keys. So for this one, what I will do is I will say new data of that key in order to access the values. So now when I refresh, you can see now that's exactly what we wanted. And as I said, for each one that we see over here, we're just gonna push it into our my students array inside the app.view component. But again, since we are already here, I'm not really very much liking this ID because it's coming from the UUID. And then when we're about to delete a student, it's not gonna work that way. So we're gonna actually need to replace this ID with the actual key, which was just visible to us. So in order to do that, I will say this key is actually going to be a new data key.id. Now let's see what we get after we actually do something like that. So now you can see this ID is replaced with the new ID, which is whatever Firebase is giving us, and that's again a lot better. The rest is just perfectly fine. So now, rather than just doing console.log, we need to actually add each object into a temporary array. So let me create the array. So it's actually called temp. Now, essentially, sorry, that's my phone. So new data of key is just going to be temp.push. I don't need to do console.log. Then once the for loop is done, notice I'm outside the for loop now. I'm just actually going to say, well, this.myStudents is just going to be completely replaced with temp. So as you see now, here is my student 1, student 2, student 3. And again, those are actually coming from Firebase, which is actually really good. So now if I actually do toggle, I'm actually, changing this dot graduated between true and false. However, when I actually try to delete, nothing is happening because in my students.view, when I click this, I'm actually emitting del dash student, and then I'm passing the student ID. And then in app.view, there is a method called delete student, which we did not actually define, but it should be really simple. So now I'm just going to define that in order to actually, once we click this, we should be able to we should be able to delete the student. So now I'll say delete student. It takes an ID, I believe, yeah. So delete student, but not. And then in order to delete a student, we need to actually do Axios.delete. Now for this one, let me show you how that should actually look like. So remember, this is JSON object. It's pretty much kind of like HTTP protocol request. So when you click this guy with this ID, look at the URL. So if I take this URL, copy it, paste it, and then add .json, you actually get the exact object, which means that this is the URL. In order to delete, the URL is just exactly going to be the same, except that this ID, which distinguishes every student, if I have that ID for a particular student, then I can delete that student from my database. To contrast, if I actually pick another guy, so let's say this one, take the URL, paste add .json, that's actually student 3 versus student 1. And again, the only difference in the URL is this guy. So now, in order to delete, I'm just gonna copy this one, go to my VS Code, provide the URL, but now I'm actually, this is gonna be, we stop the URL here, add the ID, and then add the .json as a string. So now I believe if we actually go to our app again, refresh, delete, we're not deleting on inside of the app, but if we go here to our Firebase, notice it was actually deleted. We're only having 2 students now. If I delete student 2, student 3, if I go here, look how I actually have nothing. And that's exactly what I wanted. So now if I actually refresh the page, there should be no students in here. But to make our application like really better, as we delete, we need to actually kind of update our this.myStudents array. So it's going to be this.myStudents. It's just going to be just like what we did the other day. So it's going to be this.myStudents.filter. And remember, it's kind of like for each is built inside of the filter. So it's just going to be, going through the array object by object, or student by student in this case. So as long as object.id is not equal the ID, it means that that object is just going to be in our array. So now if I go back and add student 1, we added student 1, student 2, we added student 2. So now when I click on student 2, notice they're actually deleted. And they're deleted from the page and also deleted from our Firebase database. So when I refresh, I notice it's just completely gone. When I click, it's just completely gone. So student 3 or student like 300, any number you want. And that's actually how that would be. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this part. And I think that concludes our discussion on Vue.js. I will be adding one last video for you guys, which is about how to deploy this app on Firebase. So if you see over here, there is hosting. So we're just going to actually deploy the app and host it on this Firebase. And that's what I want you guys to do when you're done with the project. Okay, so hope that makes sense to you and hope it's helpful. If you need help, just let me know. And as I said in my email earlier today, I want you guys to communicate with each other, and I want to see how you guys communicate and how to get the project to an end. Have a great day, guys. And again, let me know if you have any questions. Bye-bye.